السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيده، وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والتابعين لهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين، وعلينا معهم وفيهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. We intend learning and teaching, remembering and reminding, giving and receiving benefit and gain, encouraging adherence to Allah's book and the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, inviting to guidance and leading to goodness, seeking therein Allah's countenance, pleasure, nearness and reward, transcendent and exalted is He. We intend what our author intended, as well as our Shaykhs, and what Allah knows of virtuous intentions, and we ask Allah to accept. Barakallahu feekum. So we're continuing this lesson in Mukhtasar Al-Latif. Inshallah you all are hearing well. Alhamdulillah, everyone can hear. Very good. Alhamdulillah. Khairun. So, today, the material we're going to take, thank you. That's remembered, I'm actually opening your question now. Today we're going to take a little bit less material, and our lesson might be a little bit shorter today, though there was an important question that came from a student that may take us into another area that will fill up the time, and then after that we'll just be open for questions from you all, insha'Allah ta'ala, about anything that we've covered up to this point, and then if we finish those, we can take questions that are even outside of the material. So the handout for this week is the same as for last week. Last week we started ghusl and briefly covered its integrals, and then we said we would come back over those this week and also cover ghusl with its sunnahs. So insha'Allah ta'ala, from this lesson you should be able to perform ghusl with its sunnahs and also differentiate between the integrals of the ghusl and the sunnahs. Prior to that though, what were the 5 things? Actually, what are the 3 things that make ghusl obligatory that are specific to sisters? What are the 3 things that make ghusl obligatory that are specific for sisters? And I gave you that there are 3. I should have even just said what are those specific things that are specific to sisters, but alhamdulillah. La ilaha illallah. Childbirth, yep. That's it. Menstruation, postnatal bleeding, and childbirth. That's it. Tayyib. And then what were the others? La ilaha illallah. Tayyib. Um, so death was one that we added, and that when a Muslim dies, it becomes communally obligatory for the Muslims to prepare him to be buried and pray over him. So from that preparation is that the dead body be bathed. So that's a type of ghusl, and some authors include death as one of the causes of ghusl. This author didn't, so he just mentioned 5. The exit of sexual fluid, intercourse, menstruation, postnatal bleeding, and childbirth. Zane. That's good. Alright, so just a moment, I'm going to clear the chat, inshallah. Bismillah. Ya khair. Okay, and then what are the integrals of ghusl? There you are. Yep. Yep, there's just 2 integrals of ghusl. From that point of view, it's easier. And they are intention and getting the whole body wet. So inshaAllah ta'ala, we will cover ghusl with its sunnahs today. Okay, so we covered that and if you'll just revisit with me 1.7, the obligations of the purificatory bath. So the purifying bath essentially consists of an intention and covering the whole body with water, washing the whole body. And we talked about in wudu that there's a difference between washing and wiping. So washing means water running over something. So wiping doesn't suffice. But if one runs water or immerses one's whole body in water with an intention, one has performed ghusl. And then we mentioned that, and the author actually explicitly stated 2 intentions. One, intending to lift sexual impurity, janaba, nawaitu raf' al-janaba, or you could intend lifting major ritual impurity, nawaitu raf' al-hadath al-akbar, intend to lift a state of major ritual impurity, or you could intend just lifting ritual impurity, and if it's major that you have, that'll still suffice. And you can also intend the intention that we advised for wudu, which is nawaitu tahara lis-salah. I intend purification for prayer, or any valid intention for ghusl. And this intention is made while washing the first part of the body. And we discussed that in ghusl, as opposed to wudu, you're just washing one thing, which is your body. So whatever part of that thing that you begin washing, that's the beginning of ghusl, as opposed to wudu, where the intention must occur when you wash the face, which is the beginning of wudu. In ghusl, you could intend while washing your little toe or something else, anywhere else on your body. And then that one has to wash all of the exterior of the body, and all of one's hair and skin, both dense hair and sparse hair, and even beneath the foreskin of a man. And one has to wash the external of the body. So the mouth and nose are not external, though they're sunnah to wash. What shows of your ear is it is external, and we'll mention this again, but the sunnah way to wash it is to take a cup of water and lean your ear onto it. And for a woman who's not a virgin, a woman who's been married, for instance, from her genitalia, what is exposed when she squats is considered external here, and in most other rulings. From the point of view of istinja, it's considered external. From the point of view of intercourse, it's considered external, and what's beyond it is internal, and so forth. So basically, someone has to wash everything on their body with an intention that is valid in ghusl. If they were in a state of major ritual impurity from one of those 5 things, and they did that with none of the sunnahs, provided they didn't break wudu during the process, after that they can pray. So there's a maxim that the jurists have, and it is ma awjaba a'zam al-amrayn bi'umumihi fala yujib adwanahuma bikhususihi. Something that necessitates a greater matter in general doesn't render the lesser matter required in specific. So ghusl or major ritual impurity is a general matter, and it's a greater matter than just minor ritual impurity, which is lesser, and it's cleaned by washing just specific limbs. So when major ritual impurity was obligatory, lifting that suffices for both major and minor, though, as we will see in just a moment, it is sunnah to do wudu. So one should still do wudu as part of one's ghusl and not be lazy, unless the rare circumstance that it's the very end of the time and one is rushing to do a ghusl and catch the prayer on time. You can omit the sunnahs there. Actually, it can even be obligatory to do so. And also if you're lacking water, for instance. La ilaha illallah. And there's a beneficial mas'ala, a beneficial question that the jurists mention with respect to this point, and that is that there are 2 questions where there's no order in wudu. So order is an integral of wudu, but there's 2 exceptions where they mention that they don't consider the order. One is when you do wudu by submersion. So if you submerge the parts that you wash in wudu and then make the intention for wudu, you have wudu, even if you were just submerged for an instant. And this is the second question. When someone is in a state of major ritual impurity, which they lift, that also lifts the state of minor ritual impurity, and they don't consider the order. So even if they made their ghusl starting with their body and then later washed their head, so it wasn't the parts that are washed in wudu were not washed in order, that's all right. We say that they still lifted both major and minor ritual impurity. So again, 2 questions where they don't consider order in wudu. One is wudu by submersion, and the second is when someone lifts a state of major ritual impurity along with minor by performing ghusl. La ilaha illallah. Tayyib. So then ghusl with its sunnahs. And there's a question that relates to the intention that is a question they call the detail. Al-mas'ala ad-daqiqa. They call it the detailed question. And that is that if you're standing to do ghusl, water won't reach the folds that are between your legs without you rubbing and that will break your wudu. And we'll see, and then that causes an issue. So the scholars mention that it's recommended to begin ghusl with washing the area of istinja, front and back. So the first thing that one washes with the intention of, let's say, lifting major ritual impurity or purification for prayer is the area of istinja and what's around it from the front and the back. So basically one washes one's genitals and begins there, so that then one doesn't have to come back and touch them again after having made wudu and break one's wudu. And that is the detailed question. And then there's a detail of the detail and a way to get out of that, and we're not going to go into that. But we will just say that if you don't do it that way, and you wash that area during pouring the water over your whole body, you're going to have to make wudu afterwards in order to pray. And doing it in the manner that we just mentioned, by starting with the area of istinja, that gets you out of that problem. So that's why they mention that detail. So then when we go back to, or let's go on to 1.8, performing ghusl with its sunnahs. And we're going to mention these, but we're just going to kind of mention them in the context of how you do it in order. So siwak is a sunnah of ghusl, just as it is a sunnah of wudu. Saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim is sunnah in ghusl. Performing ablution before ghusl, and you'll see that it's actually kind of throughout the ghusl. It occurs after washing the first area. Carefully washing the body's creases, and those are places like under one's arms, checking the ears, as I mentioned. Combing the fingers through one's hair. Rubbing the body, doing everything thrice, and also the invocations after wudu, just like you doing the invocations that you do after wudu, you also do them after ghusl. So ghusl with its sunnahs. They mention, and this order is sunnah as well, and you'll remember that in wudu, some of the sunnahs are obligatory with other imams. So for that reason, we're more cautious about doing them, and it's a makruh to avoid them. It's offensive to neglect them, avoiding the difference of opinion with those imams who view them as being obligatory. So from those sunnahs, in the case of ghusl, is rubbing. One should be real careful about rubbing the body because it's obligatory with Imam Malik. And also this order takes into consideration some of the other imams. So one should do it in this order. No. So the order begins with washing one's hands, and just like you did in wudu, you're going to intend, as you wash your hands, performing the sunnahs of ghusl. And you're going to say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim while washing the hands. And inshallah, someone will ask me about doing that in the bathroom, and we'll mention the detail after. So, and you can start with your siwak too, like we did in wudu. So I'm going to do siwak, intending siwak for ghusl. 3 times, side to side, pleasing to the Lord and purifying to the mouth, as the Prophet ﷺ taught, which is the place through which dhikr passes, the place through which the remembrance of Allah passes. So we show a lot of concern to its cleanliness. And then we begin with the hands, but we also say Bismillah while washing the hands. And we have the intention of performing the sunnahs of ghusl just like we did in wudu. So I intend performing the sunnahs of ghusl, nawaitu ada'a sunan al-ghusl, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, and I just wash my hands 3 times. Then one washes, again, the area of istinja and what surrounds them with the intention of lifting major ritual impurity, or the intention of purification for prayer, or any other intention that is valid for ghusl. So one washes with rubbing and getting to all of the creases of that body, of that part of the body, so that one doesn't have to come back there. So one washes again the genital area in the front, from the front and the rear, with the intention of lifting major ritual impurity. And then after that, there is a sunnah, or at that point there is a sunnah of removing any of the impurities, or actually in any dirt that is on your body, whether it is pure or impure. Okay, so then at that point, you perform a wudu like the wudu for prayer with all of its sunnahs. Okay, so after washing the private area with the intention of ghusl, or the intention of lifting major ritual impurity, then you perform a normal wudu with all of its sunnahs, and also it has its own intention. So again, you just do wudu starting with siwak, washing one's hands, washing one's nose and mouth, washing one's face with the intention of purification for prayer or the obligation of wudu, and so forth, and then you finish wudu. So after you finish wudu, you do sunnah number 4. And sunnah number 4 is carefully washing the body's creases. In Arabic, that's ta'ahud al-ma'atif. Ma'atif are like folds or creases of the body. So someone who's heavy and they have like folds in their stomach, at that point they would check those areas. Pretty much all of us are going to have to check under our arm, wash carefully under our arms. One washes the ears, and the ears are washed like so, like taking a cup of water and laying your ear over it, just so the outside and a little bit into the ear canal that shows, which is considered external, so that gets washed. Rather than doing it like this, so that water goes way down into your ear and might cause an ear infection or something. Even if it goes in your ear, though, even in Ramadan, if it is a recommended or obligatory ghusl, it's not a problem. But in any case, this is the way they recommend doing it, like that. So you check those areas, the ears. Typically, you'll check under your arms. A man's dense beard, he might check it at that point. Anything that is going to be difficult for water, your belly button, check there. Any of the folds of your body. So those areas that it's going to be difficult for water to naturally flow down, you've already, been careful about them. And then one moistens the 10 fingers and combs them through to the roots of the hair, and moisten the roots of the hair, and that should be done thrice. And then one pours water over the head 3 times. And the Prophet ﷺ, after performing his wudu, his wives narrated that he would take 2 handfuls, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, and pour it over his head thrice. So that's what we do following Allah's beloved salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Pour water over your head 3 times, rubbing, again, your face and rubbing any area where water's going to need a little more help, more carefully. And then you pour water down the right front of your body, accompanied with rubbing 3 times. So one washes the right front of one's body, and one does so thrice, and one rubs, ideally. Then one washes the right back of one's body the same way, rubbing and pouring water over it thrice, ideally. Then one washes the front left of one's body, and then the back left of one's body, and that is ghusl with its sunnahs. And you can end with dhikrs of wudu. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله سبحان اللهم اجعلني من التوابين واجعلني من المتطهرين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم. And Ayatul Kursi and Surah Al-Qadr. So those are some of the sunnahs of ghusl, and there are many, but these are just some. It's also sunnah to do ghusl standing, while wudu is sunnah to do sitting, and it is sunnah to face the qibla in wudu just as it is in ghusl, and pretty much any virtuous work that you can do facing the qibla, you should. Very good. Okay, so there's some questions, and we'll take questions now before we move on to a student's question that was emailed. The outer body. So the question is of Muhammad Ramli: is wudu before ghusl a real wudu? Yes, it is. Can we use toothpaste when doing miswak during ghusl? Absolutely. It would be offensive if you were fasting. Otherwise, sure. Should you try to cover your private parts while doing wudu during ghusl? Covering your private area, I'm going to answer that 2 ways, Sidi Tariq, and it's an excellent question. One, from the point of view of legally when you can uncover your private area, and then secondly, from the point of view of adab. So legally, meaning in the sacred law, one must always cover one's awra, one's nakedness. And for a man, when you're alone, your nakedness is just your front and rear private part. So wearing underpants would cover it. For a lady, when she's alone, it's from her navel to her knee. So I'm going to repeat that. For a man, his awra, when he's alone, is his front and rear private part. For a lady, when she's alone, it's between her navel and her knee. So you can uncover your awra, meaning the awra that is of being alone, for any need or aim, sound objective. They call it a gharad, the adna gharad, for the slightest sound objective, like not wanting your clothing to be wet while making ghusl, or even cooling off. It's hot, and you can do it to cool off when you're alone. That's legally. So if someone didn't want any of their clothing to be wet while making ghusl and the wudu during it, that's an objective that would allow them to uncover that area. And I know that there's a certain Q&A out there that said that one shouldn't, and I discussed that with some of the other younger mashayikh here, and they felt that was a little bit tough and personally, I'm inclined to believe that that's a little bit tough. That's from a point of view of halal and haram. From the point of view of adab, it's an adab to show shyness, and many of the shuyukh advise their students, even when showering, to keep their the aura of when they're alone covered, and one won't lose by showing that extra shyness. And even when relieving oneself, we didn't mention it because the author didn't mention it specifically, but staying covered as much as you can while relieving yourself is also etiquette. And there was a question that Imam Ramli mentioned. Allah created your body, so Allah knows everything about your body, subhanahu, and everything else about you. So if you're alone and you're still covering those private areas, what's the difference? And Imam Ramli said the difference is that Allah sees one person in a state of adab and sees the other person with less adab. So showing adab with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sought. And the Prophet ﷺ said in that regard, فَاللَّهُ أَحَقُّ أَن يُسْتَحْيَا مِنْهُ. Allah is more deserving that shyness be shown to Him. Barakallahu fikum. That is a good question. And I didn't see anyone ask about doing dhikrs in the bathroom. Now, when we make ghusl, a lot of us, we're going to be in a shower that has a door that's separate from the area where the toilet is, right? So the door separates you from the toilet, or a curtain. And Allah knows best. My understanding of the question is that shower with a door that closes you off from where the toilet is, the shower compartment is not a place that we're prepared to relieve yourself. So you should be able to say dhikr when you are there. And Allah knows best. Is the wudu before ghusl real wudu? Should you try to cover? Yep. Can you please clarify basmala in shower? Oh, there, you did ask it, Musa. Yep. So if your shower has a curtain or a door, then it's like a separate room, and Allah knows best. And that wasn't prepared as a place to relieve yourself. So a place that was made to relieve yourself, that's the place where you shouldn't do dhikr. And the shower was made for bathing. For that. Bismillah. Yep, we said facing the ghusl. Facing the qibla is sunnah in ghusl and in wudu if you can. For ghusl it's usually easier. During ghusl, does rubbing with soapy washcloth suffice? The short answer is it's not likely to. And more detail will come with respect to that when we talk about water and what water is changed and so forth. And even some of the Malikis, they're kind of tough about the rubbing being skin to skin unless you can't reach an area. So you should be careful about that. Your back, if you can't reach all of it, you should take a washcloth that doesn't have soap or a brush or something and rub the areas you can't. But if you can reach it all with your hand, you should do it with your hand. So those of us that are kind of wiry, skinny, some of us might be able to reach your whole back, but some others, muscular guys and stuff, they probably will have to use something to rub their back. May I ask about a particular of what breaks, doesn't break wudu in the Shafi school? Yeah, go ahead. Just to clarify further, does the wudu before ghusl lift hadath? That's a good question. Does it lift hadath? Does the wudu before ghusl lift hadath? I have to say, I don't remember if I've come over the question. Allahu a'lam. I have to say Allahu a'lam. And honestly, Sidi Muhammad Ramli, don't worry about it too much, because you're going to run water over your whole body, and that's going to lift all the hadath that's there. Now, actually, it does. I remember. It does lift any hadith that would need to be lifted, but don't worry about it. Do we make a separate intention for the wudu and ghusl? And is it when putting water on the face? We showed you two intentions for wudu. One when performing the sunnahs of wudu, and the other when putting water on the face. Make both of those intentions as well as everything else we covered in wudu. Do a wudu just like any wudu. So if a person is without clothes while making wudu and failed to cover one's private areas, would the wudu be invalid? There's no connection between clothing that one is wearing and the validity or invalidity of wudu. The only way clothing relates to wudu is if it's a barrier between contact between one's hand and one's private parts, or between one's skin and the skin of someone of the opposite sex, with the other four criteria we mentioned. But otherwise, clothing and wudu and clothing and ghusl, there's no connection between the two of them. If no door and no curtain, then what can we do for the basmala? Okay, if you have a shower, for instance, that's just like a big one little open room, and there's a toilet there and a shower there, and there's no division between them, and you're close to the toilet, just like we mentioned in wudu, you should say your dhikrs in your mind rather than out loud, pronouncing them out loud. For Tyler B, wudu can be broken while performing it, as could ghusl, potentially, and then you have to start over. And this is a detail that isn't specifically your question, but your question brought out another detail that the jurist mentioned, so we'll add it here. If you lose wudu while performing ghusl, even after the wudu, like you make the wudu and then you're going through ghusl and you lose wudu, at that point it's sunnah to make wudu and then finish up your ghusl. I live in a place where eating camel meat is not uncommon. Zayn, so do I. Hayakumullah. The people here are insistent that eating camel meat breaks your wudu, and they usually bring up a hadith as evidence. Zayn, there's a difference of opinion there. That may be the opinion of the Hanbali school, and other imams didn't hold that view. So don't worry about it. It's sunnah though to do it from eating camel meat, to avoid the difference of opinion. So avoid the difference of opinion and the nonsense of narrow people by making wudu after you eat camel meat with them before you pray. Mafi mushkila. Because it's actually sunnah to do so, or recommended to do so, avoiding the difference of opinion. Oh, I see. There's more to the question. Understand that according to the Shafi'i school, eating camel meat does not break wudu. If I may, what is the evidence according to the Shafi'i school for camel meat not breaking your wudu? I have to pull up the hadith. Inshallah, if you remind me an email, I'll try to mention it for you next week. Hayakumullah. Okay, so we want to, inshallah ta'ala, mention or answer an important question that a student sent in that relates to the intention of wudu. And I should have actually mentioned it when we covered wudu's intention, so I'm really thankful that she reminded me of it. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten to the point where we have English commentaries on our texts. And oftentimes we splice together our own commentary from various other commentaries. So some things slip our mind when if we had a commentary in front of us, we would be reminded. So if anybody's taken these chapters before or reads in Reliance of the Traveler a lot, if we're covering a given section, and a question that's mentioned there is not mentioned and it's of interest, please ask, because that'll help us add some of the questions in their proper places. So before we move on to her question, we wanted to cover the things that are offensive in wudu and ghusl. So there are many things that are offensive in wudu and ghusl. From them are neglecting to wash one's mouth and nose. And again, you're avoiding a difference of opinion there. So that's offensive. Again, so we're mentioning some offensive things in wudu and ghusl. To neglect washing one's mouth and nose. To do the left before the right, in the case of one's arms and so forth. To deliberately wash things more than 3 times. Combing through the beard while in a state of pilgrim sanctity, which is normally a sunnah, but in a state of pilgrim sanctity, combing through the hair with the fingers, is offensive in the opinion of Imam Ramli, and in the opinion of Shaykh ibn Hajar al-Haytami, Allah yarhamuhuma, it is still sunnah, but just one does so very gently. So if you have a real curly beard, you might want to follow Imam Ramli, if you're worried about it. Wasting water, pouring more water or running more water than needed is offensive. And that's a toughie because it's offensive when it belongs to you or to someone who wouldn't mind. But if it's water from something that is endowed, like the water of a mosque that's charity, it's forbidden to do so. So wasting water is a big deal. It's offensive if it's yours or belongs to your parents and they don't mind. And if it belongs to someone who minds or it's public property, it's forbidden to waste water. So you should be careful there. And then there are some offensive things that are specific for someone who is in a state of major ritual impurity. They don't relate directly to the ghusl, but it's offensive for someone who's a junub, someone who's in major ritual impurity, like sexual major ritual impurity, or a woman after her menstruation is stopped before she's done her ghusl. It's offensive for them to sleep, eat, drink, or have sexual relations before washing their private area and doing wudu. And obviously, in the case of a woman her menstruation is stopped, it's forbidden to have relations prior to doing ghusl. And the same applies to someone who has had postnatal bleeding or childbirth. So those are some offensive matters that add those to your etiquettes of wudu that you follow in ghusl, that you avoid those offensive things. Avoiding them is rewarded. Now, is doing something offensive sinful? Now, the Hanafi school has a ruling that or a terminology that they use more often than the Shafi'i school, that's makruh tahriman and makruh tanzihan. Something that's makruh by way of being forbidden being haram, and something that's makruh, but not forbidden. And the Shafis in some chapters use that terminology, but generally in the Shafi school, when we say makruh, we just mean makruh tanzihan. Makruh that is not sinful. It's not haram, meaning one's not punished. One doesn't deserve punishment for doing it, but one deserves reward for avoiding it. So makruh, typically the definition we mean, or its ruling, is that one is rewarded for avoiding it and not punished for doing it. But it's not something to be negligent about. Not being cautious about makruh things is a cause of falling into haram things. So from that point of view, one should be cautious. And also just, it's the command of Allah, and one should be cautious to avoid the things that He's prohibited, even if it's not a prohibition of rendering it haram. One should still be cautious and avoid it. No, one does. If hairs come out of your beard when you are making wudu and you comb through your beard with your finger, it doesn't violate ihram per se. Whatever that means exactly, you don't break your ihram. Ihram actually clings to you; it's hard to get out of it. But you owe an expiation of 0.51 liters of food that has to be given to the poor. The wudu is completed before washing istinja area. No, one washes the istinja area and then removes any dirt on one's body and then does wudu. That was the order that we mentioned. So someone asked about... Tyler asked... No, I saw another question. Aywa. Musa, to clarify, if you made wudu in the shower, then lost wudu before the end of ghusl, it is only sunnah to redo. It is only sunnah to redo wudu. Yes, it's only sunnah from the point of view of the sunnahs of ghusl. The point at which you lost your wudu and what you're going to do after ghusl may render performing wudu an obligation before you do whatever, Quran or holding the Quran or praying or whatever. But from the point of view of the sunnahs of ghusl, at the point at which you lose wudu during ghusl, it is sunnah to redo wudu. Obviously, if you've already washed almost all of your body and then you lose wudu, you're going to have to repeat it before you pray. The question about if to be considered a mosque, it can't be owned. A mosque has to be a waqf. It has to be endowed, and once it's endowed, the scholars once it's endowed, it belongs to Allah. If it's a mosque. So a mosque, but what's on the title and how they deal with legally in that society may differ. But basically, once they endow it, it belongs to Allah. And in the Shafi'i school, you can't like sell a mosque and then buy another building that becomes the mosque or move it. Though there's some juristic difference there. The Hanafi school has a little more leeway there. Allah knows best. Yeah, for some reason, maybe the live stream is taking too much bandwidth, so I'm not actually able to answer the sister's. I am able to answer, inshallah. I'm not able to pull up the sister's question, So if there's any detail I missed, she can add it for me, inshallah. For Sidi Jibril, if you pull hair out when in ihram, yeah, you have to do an expiation, and we could talk about that at another point in more detail. If you clip your nails after wudu, do you have to make it again? No, you don't. If one washes his or her private parts for ghusl, then washes the rest of the body without making wudu, would she need to make wudu before praying? The answer is, the likelihood is that they would have to, yes. And the way we showed you, if they did it with the intentions in the manner that we mentioned, they would have to make wudu after. Because, yeah, there's some details there that I don't want to go into, but they would. The short answer is yes, they would. And there's a way with some details that are beyond our scope that they could avoid doing that, but due to the difficulty of it's difficult to understand, we didn't want to go into it in this intermediate text. I'm clearing the chat, and then we're going to deal with this issue of chronic nullification of ritual purity. Okay, so Jazakumullahu khairan, one of the students sent a question related to someone who's chronically nullifying their ablution. Okay, first of all, what does it mean to chronically nullify one's ablution? It means that you never have enough time during a given prayer's time to perform purification and pray without something coming out. So, for instance, someone who's incontinent and urine constantly drips, or after they relieve themselves, urine continues to drip every 4 minutes for 3 hours. So you're not going to be able to, do a 4 rak'ah prayer with wudu and istinja and everything in 4 minutes, right? Or let's say 3 minutes. Every 3 minutes, drips come out for 3 hours. So there goes dhuhr, basically, right? Through the whole dhuhr prayer, this person is having intermediate dripping of urine so constantly that they could never make the proper wudu and pray without another drip coming out. Or a woman who her period goes 16 days and she keeps bleeding and there's always color there. So that person is chronic. They're called da'imul hadath. They have a continuous state of nullification of their ritual purity. So that person, as a dispensation, or for darura, really, it's actually an azima for them, it's actually a strictness for them, but because of darura, because of the absolute necessity, they pray in that condition. And there are special measures that they have to take, because they won't have actual ritual purity. They'll just render things that are unlawful without ritual impurity lawful. Before I move on to those measures, I just want to emphasize that if at any time in a given prayer's time they have enough time, they have a long enough span when nothing's coming out to perform a proper wudu and ghusl, they're not chronic. They're not. They don't have continuous nullification of their ritual impurity. They don't fit the definition. So, like, let's say someone, if they go to the bathroom, it'll take a half hour for it to stop. Now, if they go to the bathroom, or say it'll take an hour, they go, like right now, Dhuhr time here is about 11:40, and it goes out at about 2:50. So they have about about 3 hours and 10 minutes. So let's say their drips keep going for an hour and a half. If they go to the bathroom at the beginning of the prayer time, even though they're constantly dripping for an hour and a half, we don't call them chronic. We don't call them continuously nullifying their ritual impurity. So they have to wait until that gap that they have and do a proper prayer there. But the person who's continuously nullifying their ritual impurity is the person who can't find a long enough span in a given prayer's time to do a proper wudu and prayer. So then there's special measures. The question that the sister asked was about intention. So you could put this in your notes when we covered the intention in wudu. And basically, that person doesn't lift ritual impurity. So the intention of regular intentions for wudu don't suffice them. The intention they make is rendering obligatory prayer lawful, for instance. So they intend nawaitu istibahata fard as-salah. And they do that when they would do their normal obligatory intention for wudu. Nawaitu istibahata fard as-salah. That's the intention that he makes or she makes. That means I intend to make obligatory prayer permissible or lawful. I intend to make obligatory prayer lawful. Nawaitu istibahata fard as-salah. I intend to make obligatory prayer lawful. If they want to add lillahi ta'ala, there's no problem with them adding lillahi ta'ala for Allah Most High. So with that, they make one obligatory prayer lawful for themselves, and as many voluntary prayers and other actions that weren't normally lawful, until they lose their wudu by another way. So with that intention and that wudu, they make one obligatory prayer lawful and a number of voluntary prayers. We want to mention some other measures that she takes, but really this section is kind of detailed, and it's usually an exceptional case, and we treat it in more detail in courses on menstruation, because it'll occur with abnormal bleeding. That's how she'll have to pray. So we go into more detail there, but we'll mention some other detail. We'll mention some other details that this person has to do. So generally in wudu, muwala, doing the actions continuously, meaning that you don't pause between washing two parts, like you don't wash your face and then go finish pressing down your French press and then come back and wash your arms. Normally that's not an obligation, but it's sunnah, avoiding the difference of opinion of Imam Malik. For a person who's chronic, they must have continuity between the actions of wudu. So then the extra measures that this person takes, please note these down. They must first do istinja, right? So for instance, the man's incontinent. and and drops of urine are coming out. So after he urinates, he has to do istinja, wash any najasa off his private area. Or a woman who is having abnormal bleeding, she does istinja. Then they have to do what's called tahaffuz, and that's taking measures to block or reduce the exit of the filth that's exiting them and breaking their ritual purity. So in the case of a man who's incontinent, that's accomplished by pushing a little bit of cotton into his urethra, and then also like folding a piece of cloth over over his private part, and then maybe wrapping gently like a torn piece of cloth around that was folded over and tying it so that it stops any unnecessary exit of more drops of urine. And then they perform ablution and pray immediately after that. Okay? So all of those things have to be done with continuity between them, one immediately after the other. They do istinja, first istinja, then take measures to prevent the exit of filth and that which is breaking the ritual impurity, then perform ablution and pray. And in the case of a lady, she takes measures to prevent the exit of excess bleeding or discharge or what have you by, for instance, wearing like a tampon or tightly covering herself with like a pad and tight underpants or something that will hold the pad firmly against her so that it won't move and significantly after she's covered herself. Or she can do both if one or the other isn't enough to keep back the excess bleeding, like just a pad wasn't enough to keep back the excess bleeding, or just a tampon wasn't enough to keep back the excess bleeding, then she must do both. But if one or the other is enough, she may do one or the other. In the case that she was just doing like a pad, she wants to be careful that whatever she's wearing is holding it very tightly against herself, because what the jurists actually used to say that she had to do is like wear a belt or tie like a scarf or something around her waist, and then they would take a rag that was split at the two ends, and then she would straddle that and then tie those each end onto the scarf, for instance, that was wrapped around her waist, so that she could tightly pull it down, and it would hold it there firmly against her. So as long as she has, like something that, underpants that are real tight or something, and it holds it firmly against herself, that should be sufficient. But if they mention that if it moves away from her significantly, that invalidates the covering, and then she has to go back and start from the beginning. And then what we mean by doing the things immediately is that she doesn't stop at any point for something that's not in the interests of the prayer for longer than it takes to perform 2 short rak'ahs. The 2 shortest rak'ahs you can pray, in the opinion of Ibn Hajar, even without sunnahs, so like 2 rak'ahs stripped of their sunnahs. She can't wait for something, she can't wait that long for something that's not in the interest of the prayer. But something that is in the interest of the prayer, he, in the case of a man's incontinent, or she, a woman, in the case of postnatal excess bleeding, they can wait for something that's in the interest of the prayer, but they can't wait for something that's not in the interest of the prayer. As for during wudu, they shouldn't stop throughout it, because there's no reason to, and there shouldn't be a gap between their istinja and their covering, or their covering and their wudu. And then between their wudu and salah, they shouldn't wait up to that period of time. for anything that's not in the interests of the prayer. So what's in the interest of the prayer? Waiting for the adhan, waiting for the congregation to start praying the sunnahs before the prayer, covering one's nakedness, and that can take a while. But like stopping to check on the cookies in the oven, if long enough time passes while checking the cookies to pray 2 short rakas, then you have to start over. So you should be careful about that. Answering your cell phone, things like that aren't in the interest of the prayer. So that's in a nutshell, but that's a real detailed question, and it's good that it have like a treatment, especially for ladies, in a course on menstruation and abnormal bleeding and postnatal bleeding, because even to identify what is menstruation and what is abnormal bleeding, it takes it's quite detailed. It's about the hardest chapter, at least in the area of worship, of the various chapters of fiqh in the first quarter of a fiqh book. For waqar, I'm not sure. I don't remember what Sidi Tariq's question was. For Musa, for normal wudu and ghusl, can we simply intend wudu or ghusl? We mentioned intend obligatory wudu or obligatory ghusl. Nawaitu fard al-wudu or nawaitu fard al-ghusl. I intend the obligation of wudu or obligatory wudu or obligatory ghusl. And if you don't intend that in the case of ghusl, it's not valid. What about one who is traveling and has limited time to pray but has a chronic problem? Does this person have to make wudu twice for each prayer combined? Yep. So someone's traveling, they're joining prayers, and they're chronic. They have to make a wudu for each prayer. Yep. Does this ruling of chronic excuse apply to touching the Quran as well? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And there's some detail for sunnah prayers or touching the Quran that we're going to cover with tayammum. Because the intention for someone who's chronic is actually of 3 levels. The highest level is fard al-salah, but there's 2 lower levels, and that relates to sunnah prayers and things like touching the Quran, and there's some more detail there. Do they have to repeat their wudu and intention if they reach the time for a new fard prayer and want to make sunnah nafil prayers? There's a difference of opinion among the jurists about that, and what's in my memory is the relied upon position is they don't have to make a new wudu until they're going to perform the second fard, and Allah knows best. Is walking to the mosque about 10 minutes away also considered in the interest of prayer? Absolutely. Going to the congregation, yeah. And Allah knows best. La ilaha illallah. So that actually took our time. But barakallah fi as-sa'ila. Allah bless the questioner. The key to knowledge is a question. We really need a menstruation course though, because it can't really be taught properly just in the context of a general class, because it needs a class by itself. Yep, if you intend ghusl and wash the private parts, then do wudu, and then wash the rest of the body, you can pray. Yep. I think the question that the person asked was, if you didn't do wudu, could you pray? And the answer for now is no. But there's 2 layers of detail beneath the detailed question. And that's why we don't want to go into that. No, alhamdulillah. If you do it like the way we said it, you can just go ahead and pray afterwards. And if you follow the sunnah that we mentioned, or the recommended action that we mentioned, that if you lose wudu at any time during ghusl, you repeat it at that point, then finish your ghusl, then you'll be fine and you can pray afterwards. Are there any other questions? We have a couple more minutes. They could even be off our topic because we finished the material. Alhamdulillah. Next week we'll go on to the conditions of wudu and ghusl and water. Inshallah ta'ala. We still got to add some details about istinja. And I want to do khufs too. But this text didn't have those 2 sections, so we're going to have to add it from the text. La ilaha illallah. Ya khair, Fatiha. Inna Allah yarzuqna as-sidqa. Please recite Fatiha, seeking from Allah sincere, accepted works, beneficial knowledge, good teaching, inviting to guidance. And Allah gives happiness thereby to the heart of the Prophet. And that the reward of this Fatiha go to our parents, teachers, shaykhs, those whom we owe rights, and the presence of the Prophet Muhammad. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa barak alayhi wa alayhi wa sallam. Fatiha. Alayhi wa alayhi wa sallam. La ilaha illallah. For Zainab, she asked, we told them that when a person is alone, they have an aura still. There's a nakedness, meaning something that's obligatory to cover when you're alone. For a woman, that's between your navel and your knee. For a man, that is between his, that's just his front and rear private part. So wearing underpants would cover that. That may be uncovered for the slightest sound objective. The adna gharad, the fuqaha say, the slightest sound objective. Like cooling off or not wanting your clothing to get wet. That's from the point of view of whether it's lawful or unlawful to uncover it. From the point of view of courtesy, many of the shuyukh advise their students, even when showering or almost any time when alone, to remain covered there. So like some places ladies will wear slips when they shower, like that's common in Sham, a place where there's a lot of knowledge in adab. So and some of the shuyukh emphasize that with their students. Inshallah, we're going to add conditions of wiping khus because of their importance, and we didn't do it at that section just because it wasn't in the book, and we need to maybe prepare a handout specifically on it, or at least ask people to have some of us at least type maqasid, and we'll read through it in there. But that will cover before we finish purification. La ilaha illallah. فَاللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ أَحَقُّ أَن يُرْضُوهُ إِن كَانُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. Allah said, Allah and His Messenger are more deserving that they please Him if they are indeed believers. So we please Allah and we please His Messenger, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And the messenger is only pleased by that which pleases Allah. So they're synonymous. And the interesting thing about that verse is the plural, the pronoun is singular. Now, when someone understands enough to teach the basics, sharing the basics that you've learned is fine, that you know that you've understood them and noted them down correctly, but extrapolating questions based on them is not okay, because these texts are extrapolating answers to questions based on them is not okay, because these texts are really abridged, and the idea is just to give the skeleton of the school to students. This is an intermediate class, and there's a lot of detail beyond this that's needed to answer questions properly. So teaching someone how to make ghusl, that's fine, but like some of the detailed questions that people asked here, you won't be able to answer questions like that without having studied significantly. And the other issue in English is we don't have commentaries, and there's a whole lot in commentaries. Like questions in the Shafi'i school are usually answered, formal questions are answered from the commentaries of Minhaj, which is like about 4, 5, 6 books above this one in the curriculum. And then that's the metin. What about the commentary? Inshallah. Yahya. Please recite Fatiha, seeking from Allah's sincere accepted works, beneficial knowledge, good teaching, inviting to guidance, and that Allah give happiness thereby to the heart of the Prophet ﷺ, and that the reward of this Fatiha go to our parents, teachers, Shaykhs, those who male rights in the presence of the Prophet Muhammad Fatiha.